welcome Mr. Marc Harrison from Crestron. He's joining us today, the first guest in our new podcast studio. So we're pretty excited about that. Marc, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so work with Crestron Electronics. I've been in the industry for about 25 years now. Worked with Crestron for 10 years. Other than that, I've had my own programming company, worked on the integrator side as a design engineer, started out as an installer many years ago, and just kind of worked my way up through the industry. So being with Crestron for the last 10 years, currently as the technical director for the region, I just get exposed to and get to see a lot of different technologies and things that are going on, not only for the integrators and the way they're designing things, but also for our enterprise partners as well as our education partners and what their requests are.
Excellent, excellent. And so you mentioned the region. What does that cover exactly?
So the region I cover is Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Arkansas.
Okay.
We call it TOLA. I've had other folks say that you should call it a lot because it's a big area geographically. So yeah.
Why is it that New Mexico gets, is it just because it doesn't roll off the tongue as well as TOLA? So New Mexico just gets left out. It's like a stepchild to the side.
That's west. That goes to our west region out there. Yeah.
It's literally connected to Texas.
Yes, and yet when you're in El Paso, you're closer to LA than you are DFW.
Was it like 900 and some odd miles?
Yeah, it's 12 days.
It's a ways.
Yeah.
We've also got our head programmer, Chris Meacham, joining us today. Chris, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good, sir. How are you?
Excellent. So tell us a little bit about your history here at Taurus.
I've been with Taurus just over 12 years now. Kind of once again started as an installer and worked my way up and just seen Taurus and the AV industry in general just blow up over the last.
So
12
those
years.
that are viewing the podcast may sit there and say, "There's no way he's been here 12 years. He looks like he's 25 right now."
I find it hard to believe myself.
Thank
Can't
you
believe
guys
you made
both.
it this long.
Thank you guys both for joining us. We look forward to it. Kind of mashing some ideas, talking a little bit about technology today. I think it's going to have some fun.
Well, so that's great. Our topic today is HDBaseT and AV-over-IP. So that's part of the reason we brought Marc in here. He's essentially this area's leading expert on that. I don't know if that's too much to say, but
we definitely need to keep the bar a little lower than that.
little lower than that.
Yes.
And then the reason we invited Chris is, well, he's the feet on the street, man. He's the one actually making sure all these systems work for all of our customers and providing feedback to Crestron, providing feedback to our sales folks and our design engineers for the gotchas we run into because they exist. So I think the biggest thing I'd want to bring up is the primary differences between HDBaseT and AV-over-IP. One of you care to weigh in on that?
So yeah, so HDBaseT versus video over IP. So what are the two? HDBaseT is a standards that has been out for about 10 years, ever since we first started doing digital media or a digital video system and distributing video around. HDBaseT allowed us to really overcome the cliffs that were out there with an HDMI signal path, which was about 30 to 35 feet was the longest signal or longest cable that you could put in. As you guys know, working with an integrator, rarely are the source components within 35 feet of the display across the enterprise or across the building. And
Almost never.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's your home theater, right? That's not really in the commercial space.
Maybe your home theater.
I don't
Have you seen Robert's?
I don't have a home theater. I'm not on that level, Corey. Remember, bar lower.
Got it. Sorry.
But so HDBaseT was this standards base that came out, and it allowed us to all push video around longer distances than that 35 feet, while still maintaining the quality of an HDMI signal path or your high definition signal. Video over IP is actually utilizing the network infrastructure that's in a building. The difference is really in the two, and Chris, feel free to jump in and interrupt me anytime because I can go for days. The difference in the two is HDBaseT requires a closed network, if you will, or a fixed chassis. So we've got these fixed chassis sides, and what does that mean? So how many computers do you want to be able to, how many places do you want to be able to plug your computer in and present in this room? Say 4. So I need 4 inputs. How many displays do we have in this room? Well, let's say that we have more than we have. Let's say that we have 6. So I need 4 inputs and 6 outputs. So I can use an 8 input by 8 output HDBaseT chassis. And now we can work within this fixed system or fixed chassis size, if you will. Where that becomes a challenge is, what if I've got that 9th display? Because most of us as manufacturers, we make these chassis in flavors of 8. Okay, so it's 8 by 8, 16 by 16, 32 by 32, and so forth.
That's kind of been an industry standard, even back in the analog days, right?
Yes,
so you guys could have,
absolutely.
Crestron, anybody could have made those chassis sizes anything.
12 by 12.
Right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it's been a standard for years, or an assumed standard, if you will, where everybody's just kind of done it.
Seems like a weird standard to adopt. I mean,
I feel like somebody just sat around in a room and said, you know what, we're just going to do this in flavors of 8.
I think they were looking at the back plane and saying, how many more can we put on there? I got one more. Look, it's not a 7 by 7, it's an 8 by 8 now.
what?
Nobody wants to do odd numbers.
Yeah,
Listen,
exactly.
I like round numbers. I'm good with it.
But the challenge becomes is that 9th display. How do we get a unique source on that 9th display? Well, now we go to a 16 by 16 chassis, and we're asking our end users to absorb that price, because there is a substantial price difference between an 8 by 8 chassis and a 16 by 16. Even if it's not fully populated with cards, there's still a cost difference in those two chassis. So with video over IP, what we can do is, for that 9th one, we're just leveraging a network switch. And Chris, you brought it up. We've got a 48 port network switch in the rack. That can be a 12 input, 36 output, 36 input, 12 output switch, if you will, leveraging video over IP. And so now for that 9th display, we literally just add another box, and we can grab any of the 8 inputs that are available to us throughout the system at that point.
And I think a big benefit HDBaseT still has its place in the industry.
Absolutely.
It still does. It's not, you don't have to go all out on one or the other. And I think that one of the biggest benefits of the AV over IP is your one-to-many kind of circumstances, where you do have one you want to send out to 30 displays, or you've got 30, or the other way around. It could go the complete opposite, where you're not locked into those.
That's where a fixed frame chassis stops making sense. Is like, what am I going to do with all of these, especially a card-based chassis where all of these inputs are basically blank?
Yeah.
An 8 by 8 with 1 input card and 8 full outputs.
Yeah.
Or God forbid you start cascading physical switches.
Right. Well, and the challenge becomes, that I see at least, and you guys feel free to correct me on this, because you're out there in the field working with the end users a lot more than I am these days. The challenge that I always saw is, you've got a customer that wants to do this, and the system you design for them today is not the system that they end up retiring 8 years from now. And so you don't have that flexibility with that HDBaseT system that you're going to get with a video over IP system.
Well, if I'm in, my office and I just want my PC up on my own personal monitor there that's on the other side of the room, I'm not going to do an AV over IP system for something like that.
Well, until the cost comes down, you might. That's the reason.
In another 10 years, absolutely. I'm not running RGB.
I don't even know if it's 10 years.
Well,
I think
everything speeds up.
You're talking about doing a mix and match. The reason we would consider a mix and match today would be cost.
Yes.
Yeah.
And how long, Mark? 4 or 5 years from now?
On cost?
Well, yeah. Till cost is the same as HDBaseT or even less.
Well, let's just go with, I'm not prepared to go that deep into that conversation.
I figured not. Okay.
But I'd love to see you guys at InfoComm.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Fair
In
enough.
June. Teaser there. Teaser there for the folks. So HDBaseT, just kind of sticking with that thought process, which we've known for, what is it, Mark? Is it about a decade or so?
Yes.
2010.
Yeah. Since digital media came out, it's been about 10 years.
So HDBaseT is like you mentioned, a standard, and it's our understanding, and we want the public to know the HDBaseT is the standard. Now there are different products that fall within side of HDBaseT compatibility.
Correct.
And so you can actually do some mix and matching with devices, not only from Crestron, but as an industry standard, as long as it's carrying this HDBaseT qualification, right?
You can, as long as you're not trying. Well, okay, yes, to answer your question. So it's kind of a loaded question. With our HDBaseT with digital media, we put other stuff inside of it. So while our digital media system is HDBaseT, our traditional digital media system is HDBaseT. HDBaseT is not digital media because we also embed control and some other things within that HDBaseT signal. So yes, if you're just looking for video over that signal path, then typically HDBaseT to HDBaseT or even HDBaseT Lite is going to work from a video compatibility situation.
So what I'm hearing is that you're meeting the standard and exceeding it.
Always.
Okay.
That's the goal. Well, it really is. And while we're on that, one thing that I love working for this company because they challenge us every day. I never get to rest because there's always new technology that comes out. And right after digital media launched, 18 months later, we completely changed the way we were handling HDBaseT. And on a product that was baked, released, out in the wild, we didn't have to redo anything, but our engineering staff just turned around and redid it.
Yeah, you did.
There was nothing else at the time.
I like how you said out in the wild. I'm definitely going to use that.
Yeah, that's fair.
You like that? Yeah.
Well, I think the important thing to mention about that, Robert, is, at least from my perspective, HDBaseT, they have kind of set the standard, or stuck to a standard rather. So there's a lot of interoperability between multiple brands as it relates to the video transmission portion. Everybody's kind of putting their own special sauce on the back end or on the side of it. And when we start talking about this in a minute, we're going to talk about the algorithms used for AV over IP, and that's not there yet in the way that HDBaseT is. So some of that interoperability isn't there yet, right, Mark? I mean,
it's not. And my argument for that, against that, would be is why? I mean, at the end of the day, I'm an enterprise person. We talk about the user experience with our systems, right? The user experience isn't having the meeting; it's owning the system. It's not only having the meeting, but it's their use of the system, their support of the system. Everything involved in the life of that system is their user experience. And having 15 different manufacturers for your video system is a horrible user experience, number one. And there's no management tools that's going to give you that. So why does it matter if the video standards work within each other? If it's properly designed, honestly, it's going to be one brand. That way you get a single dashboard to manage and deploy and monitor all these systems. And the uptime is going to be greatly maximized by a single brand.
And also support, it's going to be much easier if you do stick to one. Although, you got multiple manufacturers, you're going to start getting a lot of finger pointing and everything else that we run into even today.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I'll play devil's advocate for a minute.
Please.
I went to XYZ company and I bought a bunch of streaming products and I spent my budget.
Okay.
But I'm not necessarily happy with the product. And then I meet Robert, and Robert says, yeah, we've run into these issues with this. We have this product that will solve all of your problems. Okay, that's great. Can I just buy a couple of these to fix a few of these rooms, and have interoperability with XYZ company? And I think that's important to the customer who is minding their budget properly and can't necessarily forklift in an entire environment.
I think it's incredibly challenging on the integrator side when you run into that. I also think it's incredibly unfair to take anybody's solution and mix it with the product that they've already said they're unhappy with, and now they're judging your product with these other systems that are interoperable that they don't like, and they don't know if it's those products or if it's your product. I just think that's a really muddy situation, and that requires on you guys' end a lot of customer management and perception management around those things. I think it's something you absolutely try at all costs to avoid. At the end of the day, our job's education.
Well, just within the view of this room, we have 4 different displays that all take an HDMI input, no problem. Lots of people are building in interoperability seamlessly. I'm not saying that Crestron necessarily should jump on a bandwagon and build products that work with inferior products by no stretch. But again, playing devil's advocate, it's something that has come up as recent as Q4 last year for us.
Sure.
We went to survey a site, and they're like, well, we have all of this stuff. It's not great, but it works. What do you recommend?
Yeah.
And that's the boat we got into.
It's unfortunate, and unfortunately, Corey, you're going to run into it again.
Fair enough.
You'll probably run into it in the next 30 days. It's an unfortunate situation, but it exists.
Yeah. So as we merge our conversation from HDBaseT over to AV-over-IP, we're going to have a lot of customers that, like Chris mentioned, he used the example of maybe today they just want to present from their desk location to their monitor in their office where they have a small conference room. But maybe what they envision is adding the ability to really pipe that signal out to the rest of the company if the CEO wants to set in his office and give it an all-employee broadcast. So I'm assuming that it's pretty simplistic for us to use some HDBaseT technologies and start to also, bring in AV over IP technologies. I think I heard you allude to that a little bit earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're seeing a lot, not a lot, but a fair amount, is these hybrid systems, right? We have this fixed architecture system in the HDBaseT, but now it's like, oh, I've got 5 conference rooms, but the conference room everybody likes to use only holds 12 people, and we want to do a meeting room with 20. But we've got this other room that holds 12. How can we do overflow from this room to that room? And by simply taking an input from room A, if you will, where your main presenter is going to be, putting that into a streaming or video over IP solution, you can have another video over IP decoder in room B, and now you have your HDBaseT system for that room, but you're leveraging the power of video over IP for your overflow areas.
Gotcha. Okay.
And with this IP, I mean, that overflow room could be across campus.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be just right next door or anything like that.
Yes, which is going to be a lot more powerful than the HDBaseT, because we do have some, I say we have distance limitations. I mean, we can go to a single mode fiber and overcome most of those, but how many people actually have single mode fiber or a tunnel underneath their campus where they can run it? Some do, but it's not realistic in every situation.
So that's a good segue. So with HDBaseT systems, unless you use Crestron as an example, we won't use anybody else since you're sitting here.
I appreciate that.
And let's say we had an 8x8 chassis, and we had a few transmitters, a few native sources plugging into the chassis, and we're going, let's say, 300 feet over to a projection system, multiple projectors. Let's use that as an example. Is there latency involved in HDBaseT technology?
There's always latency. You see marketing things that come out that say 0 latency. No, there's latency in my voice right now from when it leaves my mouth to when it hits Corey's ears. And that's live in this room. So there's always latency. I think it's important to talk about perceived latency.
Okay.
And so, first of all, with scaling in traditional HDBaseT, there's 17 milliseconds of latency in scaling. When you start scaling video back up, and by scaling, I mean we're changing resolution.
Sure.
So we're going from 1080p up to 4K for the display. That's scaling. Now we've introduced 17 milliseconds of latency. And that's HDBaseT. It doesn't matter what you're using except for our new Intipix solution, which we'll talk about that here in a minute. But with that latency, is that perceived? What is 17 milliseconds? Corey asked before we got started, we were kind of laughing about it, and our propellers were going on our hats, Yeah, we're all geeks. We get it. But we were talking about what is perceived latency. Can you really see 17 milliseconds? I mean, that's 17 thousandths of a second.
Yeah.
Let's go with no. You can't see that. You can't hear it. You don't even get lip sync issues at that, but it does exist. So with video over IP, the solution, and we're talking about latency here, the solution or the issue has always been, can I get my video encoded, pushed out over the network, decoded on the display where I could use my mouse? So there's enough no latency, if you will, or the latency is low enough that I could use my mouse and have it look and appear like it was a direct connection. There's latency with your mouse plugged directly into your computer, but it's not perceivable.
What do you think that benchmark is? What do you think the standard for
it's for
the industry?
For years, it's been talked about as 30 milliseconds. I think with the introduction of digital, we've lowered that standard down. It's probably about 25 milliseconds today is what we're looking at, which is 25 thousandths of a second before you can actually start perceiving it. Most people, they're not going to see it at 30 milliseconds, realistically. But of course, as soon as you start running something at 30, 32, 33, 34 milliseconds, you're going to have that one guy that's going to say, or that one person that's going to say, oh, I have lip sync issues. And that's the day you're going to send your tech in that can't hear, but he's not going to hear it. It's not going to make any sense to him. But yeah, I think 25 milliseconds is the
thing you
benchmark.
brought up, is what's perceivable. And I'd agree somewhere between 50 and 100 milliseconds, things start to become noticeable. You drag your hand and you start to see the mouse move, or it's, it's not quite in the exact same spot.
Right.
And I think the argument that Robert and I, and even Chris on occasion, will see is when we're talking to a customer, the buzzword latency is thrown around.
Yeah.
And it's, well, I have video conferencing, so I have to have no latency. Or I have
funny?
an emergency operations center, I have to have no latency.
You know what cracks me up about that? Nobody talked about latency with HDBaseT, so therefore there wasn't any.
Right, exactly.
It's like, okay, so we created our own monster by even acknowledging it existed.
Well, and I'll be honest. You mentioned 17 milliseconds of latency and scaling. I didn't know that number. Prior to today, I mean, I knew that there was latency involved.
It's actually about 30 milliseconds on HDBaseT is what you end up with by the time you encode
Total
it.
sum.
Yeah, total sum, point to point, you're running about 30, maybe 28 milliseconds in latency, but no one's ever noticed it. No one's ever mentioned it. Everybody says, oh, this is awesome, so therefore there's no latency.
Right.
As soon as you talk about streaming, everybody watches Netflix and they see the buffering, which everybody thinks that's some magic word. That's called latency, folks.
Yeah.
That's not buffering.
Buffering, or the commercial before your video loads is a
Yes.
place to hide the buffer and the the latency. I mean,
Yes.
it's not trickery. It's done on purpose.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that's important to educate, everybody out there listening, all of the sales folks, all of the engineers, is latency, again, exists in everything you do. And don't get caught up in a latency argument with a customer. It's easy enough just to say, hey, latency exists in this. Did you know with HDBaseT, deep color 444, you're going to be as much as 50 or 60 milliseconds by the time you're done processing and scaling that image.
Except for, so with the Intipix solution that we're done. And so NVX is our streaming solution that we released a little over a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it was JPEG 2000 based. I know we're going to talk about algorithms here in a little bit. But what we did was, after that same thing as with the original DM release, once we released it, we started looking, how do we make this better? And we did the same thing with our NVX products. Like, how do we make this better? It was already at a 0 perceived latency, but there's got to be a way to make it better. So we actually redid the entire way that our video is encoded and decoded using a Intipix solution, and we're down to 9 milliseconds. So, and the reason I bring that up, 9 milliseconds, what is that? So how many frames a second do we draw? We talk about 4K 60, 444, and that's 60 frames a second. So our displays, our TVs, are actually drawing 60 frames every second. First of all, there's no such thing as motion video. There's just really fast still pictures, right? That makes it look like it's full motion. So at 60 frames a second, I had my laptop running a time clock that went to 3 digits. So it went to the thousandth of a second. I ran that on my laptop. I pushed it into the NVX system, out to a display. And then I grabbed my camera and just hammered the pictures, just bang, 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 as fast as I could take pictures with it. 3 out of 4 pictures, the time clock was exactly the same on the source component as it was on the display. Because at 9 milliseconds, we're almost faster than a frame of video. No one can see 60 frames of video a second. I mean, it's out of the human capabilities. So anyway, so on latency, yeah, today with the technology, it can be a non-issue depending on what you choose for your video over IP solution.
And also, I mean, the latency can come into play where, depending on what you're doing, it might not even be an issue at all. If you're just doing digital signage out somewhere,
Yeah.
I mean, does it really matter that it showed up 17 milliseconds later on the display than it does on the laptop you've got in a closet somewhere?
Right. It has no bearing.
I definitely
right.
think it's not going to come up with digital signage, right, Robert? I think the argument we're getting, again, is your emergency operations centers where they're
Space type.
Live venues,
Is really what
places,
we're
stuff
live
like that,
venues.
Yeah.
where you're seeing the actual live person and it up on a display in the same space.
Yeah. And I think as we cover latency as a whole, that's really what, when you're meeting with a client, you really need to understand their space type and their expectations as we're building these solutions, whether it be HDBaseT or AV over IP, and then understanding what they're expecting. Because I don't want to walk into a NOC and put up a huge video wall. It's running 24/7, and they need to have the best of the real time and use something that won't give that to them.
That could literally be life and death. I mean, that's mission critical.
Yeah.
At that point.
Well, so the other big thing that seems to come up aside from latency is bandwidth, and it may not come up from the end user so much. So you're going to get that from, from your network professionals who are responsible for standing up these networks for the products we're installing and selling. And so bandwidth is always a big key factor in not only our ability to design and sell the product, but explaining it in a manner that the customer, the end user, and the IT professionals can understand. And not that they don't understand bandwidth, but how the AV over IP products are going to impact their network from a bandwidth perspective.
Yes. The thing that comes up for me, and Chris, I'm sure you run into this or can input on this as well. Please do. I have go into them all the time. So I need 1 gig per port. And the IT guy's going, I don't give that for data. There's no way you're getting that for AV. And the instant shutdown on the information. And the reality is, with today's network switches that are out there and the infrastructure parts that are available, readily available, frankly, you don't need 1 gig per port. You need 1 gig per video port. The rest of it, video doesn't go to those ports if you're implementing your switch configuration properly.
Right.
Well, and I think that's a key conversation to have. Is it's an easy buzz thing to say, 1 gig a port. Well, I have in my network here, 300 or 400 some odd ports. So that's what you want from me?
Yeah.
No. Hang on. Let's back up.
Right.
How many sources and how many destinations are we talking about? 20? Okay. Well, then I need a gig per port,
but not from them, because we're going to create the gig on the video encoder. So we're not asking them for that in throughput from the internet to give me a gig a port. And our challenge, being an AV guy, traditional AV guy, not coming from the IT world, I didn't know how to have a conversation with an IT professional and actually communicate what it is we were looking for. And so until I had honed my skills up to the point where I could at least understand the vocabulary they were talking, I couldn't even have those conversations. And so it was always no, was the answer they would give me, because I didn't know how to have that conversation. And I think that's our challenge in the industry, is how do we get better talking to the IT folks? Because not only are we talking video over IP, but we've got audio over IP now as well. We've got control. We've been doing control for years that way.
I mean, there's all kinds of stuff.
Yes. I mean, we are forced to interact with them. Every single project, we're interacting with the ITs. And 10 years ago, it wasn't that case.
No.
I mean, it just wasn't.
Most of the time, it was a facilities manager.
Yeah.
The very last person I think that you would probably talk to was it someone in IT.
Can you imagine, Robert, going into a facility today and the IT guy being there and saying, "Oh no, we don't need to talk to you today. We'll get with you in 2 months when my guys show up."
No, I'm afraid that I would get chewed out.
Let's just say you probably
would.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't get a second opportunity to go back in there.
No, sir.
Yeah.
Well, and so that brings up a good point, and we're not going to do a deep dive on network today, but is that something we should deep dive? I mean, and what I mean by that is, sure, we all have a pretty good understanding of network infrastructure and port requirements and bandwidth requirements and how that impacts a customer's network. But is there any interest in having a conversation so that everybody listening has a better understanding of what the real impact on a customer's network is as it relates to AV over IP? I mean, we're going to touch on all these subjects, and that's great, but we could talk for an hour solid just on security, latency, and bandwidth.
Absolutely. And security is the other one. So we're talking about video over IP, and I'm kind of jumping through this thing, but video over IP, all of a sudden now we're on the customer's network. If you are not prepared from a security measure to support your 8021X, your SSH, your SSL, your Active Directory. I mean, all the security protocols that are out there that the IT professional is insisting on, that is not a viable product in the enterprise solution. It's just not. So and why is it important? Remember when Target, was it a couple years ago at Christmas time, and that everybody's information got out right after Christmas for Target or whatnot? Do you know how that
I don't shop at Target. Not because of that.
I do.
But your wife does.
Yeah, she does.
So he doesn't shop.
I'm trying to cut it off though, because she spends a lot of money. It's impossible to go into Target without spending $100. It's kind of like Costco.
Oh, I get in trouble at Costco.
Oh yeah, I do too.
Big time.
I end up buying clothes there all the time.
Oh yeah.
This isn't a Costco shirt, but I do have.
Neither is this one. This one was a free shirt. So I didn't have to pay for this one.
My problem is the butcher and meat section in the back.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So, but anyway, but back to this. Do you know how that infiltration happened? How they got into Target's network to do that?
How?
They didn't go through the firewall. They went into an appliance on the network.
Okay.
And then got into the network through the appliance because the appliance was talking to things outside the network. And so as a manufacturer, we're making things that live on this network. If someone can get into that network through our device, how many times do you think the enterprise folks are going to be saying, yay, let's put more of that on the network? So as an integrator, that's something security is important at the appliance level. Yes, that's great. You have a firewall. Congratulations. However, I may not go through the firewall. I may go around it to an appliance that's already reaching out, that you've put requirements into your network to allow it to reach out.
Well, and it's silly stuff like a warehouse barcode scanner that lives on the network that talks to, a firmware updater in the cloud.
Yeah.
I mean, it's literally something that simple. It doesn't have to be an overly complex device.
No.
I mean, even the cameras that are recording this podcast are on our network.
Yes.
If they were vulnerable, they could potentially be leveraged.
Absolutely.
Not to mention a video streaming product.
Oh yeah. And so network security becomes, it's as important as the video quality is the network security side of these things, because we are impacting the network. If a meeting room doesn't work and they can't get video, does anybody get fired? Maybe. Maybe
typically.
not, but not typically. But if we take down the network, does the IT guy get fired? He might.
I'm sure it's happened.
Yeah, I'm sure it's happened too. And so that's what we got to think about when we're talking about IT and how we impact those folks, is that we could literally impact their livelihood with this. So it just,
business can go on without one meeting room.
It can.
The network now, it can't happen
Well,
anymore.
it's not even,
exactly.
A breach like that. Likely they did not take down the network. They just utilized it until they were shut out.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, if you're, and we're kind of getting down in the weeds here, but if you're really interested in hacking somebody, you want to do it without being recognized until you gain everything you need.
And then you could exit without anyone knowing.
And then you exit and you move on. If you do silly things and expose vulnerabilities, you're going to, you may not get caught, but those vulnerabilities are going to be, are going to be exposed and rectified. Right.
They have to be closed. Yeah. So no, I just wanted to talk about that. And then on the bandwidth thing, we're talking about 10 gig versus 1 gig, right? The one thing that comes up and you'll hear is compression. So what is the size of an HDBaseT 4K 60 signal, right? It's with deep color. It's
I mean, on this chart, we're looking up here. It's 4.48 is the approximate data rate once it's gig a second
for 1080p.
For 1080p, 60, right?
Yeah, 1080p 60.
All of those are 60.
Yep.
4K 30 is 8.96, so we'll call it 9 gig a second.
Yeah. And so 4K 60 would be double that.
Well, earlier we were talking about HDBaseT and perceived latency and all of that stuff. I mean, even the data rate involved in a 4K 60 HDBaseT is 18 gig.
Yes, exactly.
So we know that transferring data in general is going to have a latency impact.
Sure. Yeah. So when we talk about 1 gig versus 10 gig, we're talking, there's still for 4K 60 deep color, you're still looking at a 2-to-1 compression to get that out. And compression's not the enemy. It really isn't. It's the algorithms to get from point to point that really do it. What are you using to encode? What are you using to decode? And what does your video signal look like? We do these comparisons. I had to do one a month ago where we went in and the end user wanted to see our product versus somebody else's product. And I remember we're in the middle of this demonstration and we're looking at a streaming box versus a streaming box. And I'm thinking about halfway through it, well, that's dumb. But why are we comparing it to another streaming box? Who cares what the other streaming box looks like? Why don't we compare it to the HDMI signal raw? Because that's really what we're trying to reproduce. And that's what we need to be comparing the video signals to in a stream is the actual HDMI direct connect signal. If it can look like that, you're golden. No other demonstration needed. That's what we need to be comparing these two because there are always chinks in the armor when it comes to these encoding and decoding algorithms. There always is. You know, does it do motion really well? Absolutely. How's it do on still pictures? And where do our systems live? Our systems live in PowerPoint, Excel, and doing conferencing 90% of the time. Those are not motion videos. We need fixed video. And so we need a product that does both. And that's one of the reasons that we flipped over to Intapix. It just does a better job with some of the areas where JPEG 2000 was fine, but it could have been better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so that brings us into talking about streaming protocols or algorithms, right? Yeah, I mean, no, you're good.
Yeah.
So part of what I wanted to talk about was Intapix versus JPEG 2000 versus H.265, which is replacing H.264. So we'll skip over H.264. And then the elusive AVB, which we joked earlier offline or off air that AVB is kind of the display port of the streaming world. It's a great product, but nobody seemed to pick up on it. The most common to me seems to be JPEG 2000 and H.265. Right?
Yes. Well, and to me, and Chris, I'd love to hear your input on this as well. I keep monopolizing the microphone here. I apologize. To me, the thing when we talk about these different protocols and we look at AVB, you know, Chris, you said you've been doing this 12 years. 12 years ago, when you went in and you talked to an end user or went in and installed, because you were installing at that point. You guys were making one-off systems that were made for that customer, specific for that customer's needs. Heck, we were still putting source components dedicated to that room in the room, right?
We were terminating B and C's till our fingers bleed.
Absolutely.
All day.
All day.
All day.
Yeah. And then, you know, it was just a whole different world. But the reality is that's what people needed, and that's what the industry required, and that's what people needed in their meeting spaces was these one-off systems. Today, if I went in and started talking to an end user, an education or an enterprise person about, we're going to build this system for you, and it's going to be one-off. You're the only one in the world that's going to have one like this. It would be like dismissing the IT person in the meeting. You wouldn't get a second meeting. They don't want specialized. They want generalized. They want repeatable. They want that same user experience. They want it across everything they're doing. And when you start talking about, everything's great on your network except for this is going to be specialized, even if it's a good product, you're going to run into some hands up and some drawbacks from that, unfortunately. And
with the specialized, I mean, to help support it, I mean, you almost need an expert for every single room because each room is completely different than the other and everything else. And then that's what we hear all the time now.
Oh, yeah.
We want to get a generalized idea and roll it out everywhere, where you can walk into each room and it's running the same stuff everywhere, where I know how this one works, and I can go into this room. I know how this room works.
We'll get into Flex on the next one.
That's a good plug there, Mark.
Yeah. Well, Chris just walked me right to it, man. But yeah, you're right. That is what they want. The support side, it gets back to what we talked about earlier, which is the user experience, you know, the ownership experience.
Okay. Well, Robert, you and I were discussing earlier as well, unicast versus multicast. And I think that's another one of those network-related topics that doesn't come up enough. It doesn't, like, in my opinion, it probably should be one of the questions asked up there with, what's the latency? What's the bandwidth? Is it unicast? Is it multicast? Can it do either? You know, and so I think part of the mysticism in this case is, what is unicast? What is multicast? Chris?
Well, I mean, your unicast is going to be a a lot of your point-to-point sort of things. Your multicast is going to be your one-to-many. You're just using up. I mean, it gets to a point with your unicast versus multicast where eventually you're going to start using way more bandwidth on. If you're doing just unicast everywhere, you switch over to multicast, where everything's kind of picking up on the same stream.
Well, that's kind of why I mentioned it needs to be brought up with the bandwidth conversation.
And the networking conversation, too. Right. I mean, if you look at unicast, what do you have to do in your network switch if all I'm doing is communicating with Chris all the time?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter what goes on in the other ports, right? Because we have a one-to-one relationship in unicast. As soon as I dump a multicast stream into that network switch, all of a sudden now it's saying I'm available on all the ports.
Everywhere.
And so your switch configuration becomes vital, or you just flooded the network. You know,
Which is very easy to do if it's not set up right.
Oh, yeah, it can happen. Yeah, done it. You know, yeah, took out a complete network on a demo one time. The guy swore up and down he had it configured the way that we had sent them, and I went out there and plugged the box in, and it wasn't ready.
Oh, no.
So, yeah, it was a complete ISD.
Were you buying lunch that day? Or?
No, but there was a lot of folks running around at the ISD trying to figure out why every computer in the ISD just went down.
Got a great story about how I took down the entire Las Vegas Valley Water District.
Nice.
We can get into that in a different time.
Yeah.
Was it multicast or unicast? Robert?
Oh, no, it wasn't anything like that.
Wasn't anything like that?
You know what's funny is, so we call those, some people look at those as failures. I call those as learning curves.
Oh, yeah.
Learning experiences. I learned that from now on, you know, I verify 17 times. Can I see the configuration? Yeah, let me take a look at that. All right, you got any rooms in use right now? No? Are you sure? Let's go do a tour. Now let's plug in.
Which comes back to the relationship with whoever's setting up their IT on site. I mean, they tell you it's all configured right and everything else. You take their word for it and dump a encoder on the network, and all of a sudden their entire network goes down.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was 18 sites.
Well, a properly set up, layer 3 switch with multicast routing enabled, using Crestron's NVX product in this case,
right,
can save a ton of bandwidth, especially if we're talking about 3 or 4 sources sent out to 80 or some odd displays. At that point, while we've called out a gig per port, we're not really using a gig per port in this case.
No.
We end up using, 7 to 9 gig total, and we're able to stream it out all over a large campus network in this case.
Yeah, and with the NVX product, the bandwidth's adjustable. You can bring it down to 200 meg per video signal. Don't expect the same clarity as you get at 750, but you will get a video signal. You can push video out across. If you're running 1080p, do you really need 750? No, you don't, and you're going to get a perfectly fine video signal at a lower bandwidth. So, that's a good point. The bandwidth.
Well, and that's where you also just need to have knowledge on how their network is constructed. If they've only got, a 1 gig fiber between their switches and all that kind of stuff, I can't dump 6 transmitters on one switch at 750 and expect it to get to all of it.
It's going to be a little tough.
Right.
Well, and what I hear you saying, though, is we have that flexibility in most AV over IP streaming products, including Crestron's NVX product.
Oh, yes. Well, I know that ours has it. I know of 2 or 3 others that have it. I'm sure there's some that don't, but for the most part, most of them have it. The other thing going back to one thing, we talked about standards earlier, and one of the charts you have it right here. So the SDVOE folks that say they have a standard, that's not a standard, that's a club. I mean, that's a club of folks that got together and said, look, we're going to agree to buy this board and we're going to do a 10 gig video over IP solution. But show me somewhere in the industry of the people that actually write video standards where that's a standard. It's not a standard. It's a bunch of folks, and they say that it's all interoperable. Is it? We don't have a single dashboard to control all those. You don't have the ability to plug and play and monitor all those from a single place. We get back to that user experience, and that's another one we need to talk about is XIO Cloud and how that changes the user experience.
Hold on, back up. If we're going to talk products, what's XIO Cloud? I mean, I know what XIO Cloud is, but you're just going to throw it out there.
I'm so glad you asked.
Well, you're going to throw it out there like everybody knows what we're talking about.
You took that perfect. Yeah. So no, XIO Cloud is our management deployment configuration software that lets you deploy all of your Crestron products from a single dashboard. You can monitor them. You can see whether they're online or offline. You can change configurations on them. The flex conversation that we want to have later, it will come into more play with that. But today, the nice thing is with scheduling panels, for instance, you guys as an integrator, so we look as a manufacturer, we've got to go out, our goal every year is growth, as yours is, right? I mean, that's all our goals is growth every single year. How do we grow as a manufacturer and not say, Robert, Corey, Chris, this is what we need you to do. I need you to hire more people so we can grow. That is not realistic from a manufacturing perspective if we're truly approaching this as a partnership. Our responsibility is to create tools and products that allow you to grow and deploy more of our products without having to grow your staff. Now, we hope you grow your staff because you're growing at a larger rate than what we're gaining by saving you time with the products that we're deploying, right?
Sure.
So XIO Cloud is our way of going about and deploying all these. We talk about scheduling panels, which is a whole other conversation, but it's an easy example for XIO Cloud. What level of technician do you need on site to install a scheduling panel?
I mean, how do we say this politically? We don't say low level.
But
we say level C.
A salesperson could do it.
Yeah.
That hurts a little bit.
So someone who can basically operate a sheetrock saw.
Sure.
Which the salesperson's questionable on that. I get it. But,
that was worse than what I said. Yeah, I'm just putting that on record.
Yeah.
Honestly,
he also has to terminate an RJ45.
And you got to terminate an RJ45.
Okay,
but where
No,
I'm
we'll
going
leave
with
that for
is,
level B.
Yeah, that's level
You don't
B.
touch that.
But where I'm going with that is, so you can install one easily. Now, what does it take to configure that scheduling panel and get it configured and working with their scheduling platform? What level of technician does that take? Mm-hmm. Is that still your C level person, or is that your B level? Is that your A level? Well, it depends on your infrastructure within your company. So, what if you could say that, okay, Chris, you're the lead programmer here and the guy that runs the programming division here at Taurus, and I could say, Chris, we're going to do 35 scheduling panels at this facility. And here's the MAC address and the serial numbers for all of these. And I need you to get them configured so that, because this weekend, my daughter and I, we're going to go out there and we're going to cut these in and install them. And on Monday, when they come in, I want them working. Now, all of a sudden, we've totally leveraged your ability to go out and use your trim level guys to install and get things up and running, because Chris did all the pre-configuration in XIO Cloud. So
otherwise, you're saying I got to go out there on Saturday, but you want to fix that.
Typically, yeah, you're on site doing that, or you're on the phone, or you're conferencing in, viewing in to their team, viewing in to their laptop to be able to do all that. Now you don't have to do that with XIO Cloud. So that's what it is. It's a new product for us, but it's a software-based solution that is really gonna, it's changing the way that we do business every single day, because one of the things that we've done at Crestron and that we fully believe in is we have to stop taking the traditional AV approach to these systems, or we're going to lose out. As AV companies, we have to do it more the way that the IT folks do it, because they do mass deployments, they do remote management, they do all this stuff and have for years. We've got to be able to do that with our AV products. So.
Well, and we keep referring to it as AV over IP.
Yeah.
In a couple of years, it won't be AV over IP. It's just going to be IP. It's not. Yeah. There's not going to be a delineation in conversation as it relates to, I live in this subset and you live in this subset, and somehow we all have to work together. Really, it's just going to be one organic environment, and what's going to happen is we're all going to become network engineers. And there are going to be people in our industry on both sides, manufacturing, integration, and we're going to have to adapt or die.
Yeah, and I hope everybody listening heard what Corey just said. We're going to have to become network engineers. If you're in AV and you're not focusing on growing your chops and networking, you're behind. That is critical to the future of our industry.
And it goes both ways. Not only us as integrators need to be more versed in all the network, but the client side, their network engineers need to become more versed in AV. They're both coming together.
It's getting dumped in their lap every day, whether they want it or not.
I had many meetings with their network engineer, and they look at me starry-eyed with
they're deer in headlights, aren't they?
What to my network, basically, and they.
We're almost spending as much time educating on AV over IP is we are actually integrating it right now
Yeah.
with so many of our customers. And we have, I would say, a good amount of customers in the Fortune 500. And to come in and to talk to them about AV over IP is a little scary. It throws up a lot of red flags and paranoia in the IT staff. And I think security, talking about that, talking about how someone like us, we can even stand up a network dedicated to AV over IP, which we've just recently done on a fairly large project where, Taurus has actually designed the entire network that's going to run that traffic and all that control and all that audio and video. So I think that's important to know. We've kind of been touching on in our entire conversation that the customer's network needs to have this. And don't get me wrong, there's still customer network interaction, but there is the possibility of standing up a system that can support all of your needs autonomous to your traditional day-to-day traffic.
And while we are doing that, that's because it's scary and the customer's not quite ready. And it's coming down the pipe, and we're trying to give them a technology that's gonna surpass what maybe HDBaseT is doing today. So we've opted to stand up these networks to run that, but that's not really the intention. The intention is to dump this stuff on the customer's network.
Yes.
And we're just kind of circumventing that today.
Yeah.
And it's a good middle of the road, right? We get to give them the latest and greatest technology, a world-class network to run it on, and they don't have to fear for their data's sake in this case, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, they're just still scared. They don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
It's still, to them, to, use that term again, it's the wild, wild west for them. And they don't want us as AV people touching their network. And it's just a fear factor for them.
Well, hopefully this podcast has helped educate a few people on this subject. And again, I mentioned earlier, is it worthwhile having, a deep dive conversation about network? Is anybody even interested in hearing that, whether it's our own customers, whether it's potential AV integrators listening to this, or sales folks, or programmers, design engineers, whatever?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that if people want to hear more about some deep dive and particulars around AV over IP, we want to educate those people. So I hope that anybody that does want that, they can reach out to us at our email address at info@taurustechinc.com. Just in closing, we want to say thank you so much to Chris Meacham for being here. I mean, he offices here, but he's here in this room with us. And also thank you, Marc Harrison with Crestron. We really appreciate your time. I think you're so knowledgeable, and it's awesome to hear you speak about these technologies, and we look forward to doing a few more of these together.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. This is a pretty cool room, guys.
Thanks, man.
Yeah,
Thanks.
this really is.
Thanks.
You guys did a great job on
The Brainiacs over here,
Yeah.
they take care of it. I just get to sit here in the chair.
Well, you're the pretty face, man.
Yeah. I want to go over one more thing real quick.
Okay.
I'll make it super
Sure.
quick. So we talked about the 1 gig versus 10 gig. And, how many ports, and when we talk about, when they measure network switches, or they don't measure network switches that are sold, because was it an 8 port? Was it a 24 port? They measure the number of ports. How many 10 gig ports were sold last year?
Man.
Is this a quiz? I don't think
It's less than 1 to 10 versus 1 gig ports.
Wow.
So is the infrastructure out there to support a 10 gig video over IP solution? That is not where we are seeing the growth. That is not what I'm hearing from the people that I talk to. That is not where they're moving. They're not moving towards 10 gig. The infrastructure cost is still too high. You're looking at specialized cabling.
Sure.
You're looking at a lot of other things. Where what people are talking about is this new level that's coming in, this intermediary level, if you will, this up to 5 gig switches. And so that's the predictions are that in the next 2 years, those sales are going to surpass 10 gig. And probably in the next 12 months, they'll surpass it, because it still runs on a typical Cat 5.
Yeah.
So the infrastructure wiring's already going to support it.
I mean, I really see it. Just we all sitting here at this table have been in this industry long enough to see things like standard definition migrate, and people hold on to it for so long. And I remember it just didn't seem that long ago when someone said, "No, I have to have that VGA connection." We probably don't even need HDMI. And those are the customers that we talk to more frequently because now they realize that, I wasn't just a sales guy standing in front of them saying that. And I feel like that AV over IP is the same way. I feel like that people like Crestron, I hate to say it negatively, but are really going to force the hands of customers because that's the way that this is going. And just like you can't hardly go out and find a piece of technology that will allow you to send an S-video signal 500 feet. I don't even know if they have those anymore.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
But just like that same respect, where you really can't find those pieces, I feel like that this industry is going to take us and force us into that. So really the moral of this is that customers need to be educated. We want to help them do that. And we want to ease them into AV over IP before it becomes really a necessity versus, hey, this is a new way of doing things.
Well, the nice thing is we still have the HDBaseT solution for that. So the video over IP is going to come. I mean, it really is. It's a matter of when, not if. When's the last time any of you did anything out in public and walked into a space, whether it was a restaurant with your family or walking into a store, into a mall, whatever, or even out visiting with customers, that you didn't at least hear audio, but usually hear audio and see video? And
Oh yeah, I'm critiquing it all the time.
I know. It's a curse, isn't it?
It's a curse.
It's background to everybody else but us.
Yeah. I'm looking at wiring behind TVs.
Oh, it drives my wife crazy.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
It's no different from a furniture designer. They walk into every space and they're touching things and moving them around.
My girlfriend's constantly like, "What are you doing?" As I'm leaning over, looking behind the projector that's up there, and I'm just shaking my head. She's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Can you see that?" She goes, "Oh my God."
Yeah.
It's hung with some chicken wire. That's never a good idea.
I wouldn't sit there.
No. Well, thanks again for you guys. I appreciate you guys taking the time out of your busy morning. Thanks to Robert for hosting us. You have anything else?
No. Just thanks again. My counterpart, Corey Church and Robert Parsons. Thanks again to Chris and Mark. And we hope to have you guys back listening soon.
I look forward to it, man. Thank you guys very much for allowing us in here today.
Thanks guys.
everybody.